This is not merely a discussion about politics. It is an examination of what happens to the human mind when power, fear, sleep deprivation, and addiction begin to fuse together. History often teaches us the wrong lesson about collapsing regimes. People imagine that power collapses suddenly through revolutions, assassinations, or economic disaster. But psychology tells a different story. Long before a government collapses externally, it usually collapses internally. And the first battlefield is not the streets. It is the brain of the leader. Today we are going to analyze the psychological architecture of power, decay through neuroscience, behavioral psychology, and political cognition. Because the most dangerous leader is not the one who loses power. It is the one who cannot emotionally survive without it. If this lecture helps you understand the hidden psychology of authority and control, please subscribe, like, and share this video. Let us begin. In the previous lecture, we explored dopamine, addiction, and obsessive dependence on social media feedback. Now we move to the next stage of deterioration, and that stage is sleep collapse. Many people think sleep deprivation is simply a health problem. It is not. For political leaders, sleep deprivation becomes a neurological destabilizer. It alters perception, emotional regulation, and risk assessment. Imagine a leader who sleeps only 3 or 4 hours a night. Every evening he scrolls endlessly through social media, searching for approval, enemies, reassurance, or signs of betrayal. Outwardly, he still appears powerful, but internally the brain is beginning to malfunction. The first change is impulsivity. Under normal conditions, leaders deliberate. They review reports, consult advisors, examine consequences. But under chronic sleep deprivation, reflection is replaced by reaction. Arrest them immediately. Announce it now. Crush the criticism before it spreads. At that point, decisions are no longer strategic. They become emotional reflexes. The second change is rising aggression. Neuroscience shows that lack of sleep weakens the brain's emotional regulation systems, particularly the prefrontal cortex. Small criticism begins to feel like personal attack. A journalist asking a difficult question no longer sounds like part of democratic discourse. Instead, the exhausted mind interprets it as, they are trying to destroy me. They are undermining my authority. Soon, the press becomes the enemy. Critics become traitors. Disagreement becomes war. And this leads to the third stage, conspiratorial thinking. This stage is extraordinarily dangerous. The sleep-deprived brain begins forcing unrelated events into one unified narrative. A protest is no longer a protest. It becomes evidence of hidden coordination. A policy failure is no longer incompetence. It becomes sabotage. Every criticism feels connected. Every setback feels orchestrated. The mind begins searching desperately for invisible enemies, because accepting ordinary failure would threaten the leader's psychological identity. Then comes the fourth and most critical stage, reality distortion. At this point, objective facts become less important than emotional belief. Thousands may be protesting in the streets, yet the leader insists, the majority still supports me. This is only manipulation by a small group. This is the moment when power stops functioning rationally, because reality itself becomes negotiable. And here we reach the central transformation. At first, control may have been justified as maintaining order, but once fear, exhaustion, and paranoia take over, control mutates into irrational repression. Procedure disappears. Emotion replaces judgment. Power stops protecting stability and begins protecting insecurity. This is why history repeatedly shows us the same pattern. A leader who cannot sleep eventually becomes a leader who cannot think clearly. And when rationality weakens, fear takes command. That is why the most dangerous moment for power is not when a leader loses authority. It is when a leader loses rest. But the psychological collapse does not stop there, because now we enter something even more destructive. The daily reinforcement loop of power addiction. This loop operates almost like a neurological drug cycle. During the daytime, the leader exercises power aggressively. Investigations begin. Opponents are targeted. Institutions are pressured. But by evening, Anxiety returns. The protests grow larger. International criticism increases. Internal resistance spreads. And the leader asks himself, why is everything getting worse even though I tightened control? That question creates panic. Unable to tolerate the anxiety, the leader returns to social media late at night. He posts emotional statements. He blames enemies. He promises retaliation. And then something important happens. Supporters respond instantly. The dopamine returns. For a brief moment, the leader feels emotionally stabilized again, but only temporarily. The next day, the previous level of control no longer feels sufficient, so the measures intensify. A limited investigation becomes a nationwide crackdown. Targeting one critic expands into targeting entire organizations. This is the hidden mechanism of authoritarian escalation. Not because the leader feels strong, but because internally he feels increasingly weak. This is one of the most misunderstood truths in political psychology. Many authoritarian behaviors are not expressions of confidence. They are expressions of fear. Now we arrive at the threshold stage, the final warning signs before internal collapse accelerates. There are 4 major signals. The first is overreaction to minor criticism. A college student posts criticism online. A journalist asks a difficult question. Under healthy leadership, criticism is tolerated. But once psychological instability deepens, criticism itself becomes intolerable. The goal is no longer debate. The goal becomes elimination. The second signal is internal purging. At this stage, loyal advisors become threats simply for speaking honestly. An advisor says, this policy is dangerous. Instead of discussion, the leader hears betrayal. Competent people are removed. Only emotionally loyal figures remain. And from that moment forward, the leader begins losing contact with reality because truthful information disappears. The third signal is escalating external hostility. As internal insecurity grows, leaders increasingly blame foreign enemies. Domestic unrest becomes foreign interference. Public dissatisfaction becomes international conspiracy. This is not strategic diplomacy. It is psychological projection. The fourth and most dangerous signal is information filtering. The leader accepts only information that reinforces his emotional worldview. Negative intelligence is dismissed as fake. Warnings are ignored. Reality itself becomes selectively edited. And once this happens, correction becomes almost impossible because the system loses the ability to recognize its own mistakes. This is the critical point. When leaders can no longer tolerate criticism, no longer trust advisors, no longer distinguish opponents from enemies, and no longer accept reality, they stop governing. They start surviving psychologically, and that changes everything. Neurologically, the leader enters hyperarousal. The brain remains permanently trapped in threat detection mode. Psychologically, the leader develops victim consciousness. Despite holding immense power, internally he feels persecuted. Behaviorally, control becomes addictive. The leader does not use control to solve problems anymore. He uses control to reduce anxiety. And politically, long-term strategy disappears entirely. Economic planning fades. Diplomacy weakens. National vision vanishes. Only immediate emotional survival remains. How do I stop this criticism today? How do I silence this threat tonight? This is the final transformation. The leader is no longer holding power. He is clinging to it, and there is a profound difference between the two. A stable leader uses power strategically. A frightened leader becomes psychologically possessed by it. That is when systems become dangerous, because the collapse of power rarely begins outside. It begins inside the mind. The Tibetan Book of the Dead contains a haunting warning. A consciousness unable to face reality becomes lost inside its own illusion. Power behaves the same way. The moment leaders stop seeing reality and begin believing only the world they created for themselves, collapse has already begun internally, even if outward authority still appears intact. So perhaps the most important question is not whether a leader still holds power. The real question is this: does that leader still see reality? or only the reflection of his own fears. If this lecture gave you a deeper understanding of political psychology, neuroscience, and the hidden mechanisms of power collapse, please subscribe, like, and share this video.